Send the money, Dad. Nobody needs you there. You'd embarrass me in front of my colleagues. She said it the way you'd tell someone to move their car out of the driveway. Flat. Practical. Like I was an inconvenience she'd been tolerating for years and had finally gotten tired of managing. I was 63 years old. I had calluses on both hands from 40 years of working construction sites across Ontario. I'd poured concrete in -30 weather in Sudbury. I'd driven 4 hours each way to Thunder Bay on a job that paid just enough to keep the mortgage current the winter my wife got sick. I'd done all of it without complaint, without asking for recognition, without once thinking that any of it made me special. That was just what you did. You showed up. You worked. You made sure the people you loved had what they needed. And now my daughter was telling me not to show up. The promotion dinner was at a restaurant in downtown Toronto, one of those places on King Street where the menu doesn't list prices because the kind of people who eat there aren't supposed to need to ask. My daughter, a senior associate at a consulting firm, had apparently become the kind of person who ate there regularly. I hadn't been inside a restaurant like that since her mother and I celebrated our 25th anniversary, and even then I'd spent half the evening quietly calculating whether we could afford the dessert menu. She had called me on a Tuesday evening. I was in the kitchen reheating leftover beef stew, still in my work clothes. I'd been helping a buddy of mine frame out a deck edition in Berry. Retired guys do that. Fill the days with useful things. And my knees were reminding me that I wasn't 40 anymore. I answered on the second ring because I always answered when she called. That was another thing I did without thinking. You pick up. Always. Dad, the dinner's on the 14th. Firm partners, a few clients, probably some people from Bay Street. It's important. I know it's important, I said. I'm proud of you. There was a pause. Not a warm one. I just think it would be better if you didn't come. You know how these things are. I didn't say anything for a moment. I set my fork down on the edge of the bowl. I'm not sure I do, I said. These people, Dad, they're a certain type. They're going to ask what you do, where you went to school. You're going to talk about construction, and I just... She let the sentence dissolve, which was worse than if she'd finished it. I'll send you pictures. I'll call you after. I just think it's cleaner this way. Cleaner. That was the word she used. I'd taught her to ride a bike in the parking lot of a Canadian Tire in Hamilton when she was 6. I'd sat outside the hospital for 11 hours the night she had her appendix out when she was 14, drinking terrible vending machine coffee until a nurse finally came out and told me she was fine. I'd written the check for her first semester at Western without flinching, even though it meant pushing back the kitchen renovation her mother had wanted for 3 years. I'd co-signed her first car loan, helped her move 4 times, driven to Toronto on a Friday night in February because she called crying about a breakup and didn't want to be alone, and the word she landed on was cleaner. I told her I understood. I told her I hoped the evening went well. I told her to call me after if she wanted. Then I hung up and sat in the kitchen for a long time, looking at the bowl of stew I no longer felt like eating. My son called 2 days later. He's younger than his sister by 3 years, lives out in Kelowna now works for a vineyard out there doing operations. Different kind of life than the one I imagined for him. But he seems genuinely happy, which is more than a lot of people manage. He called because she'd apparently mentioned something to him about the dinner, and the conversation had circled back to me in a way that prompted him to pick up the phone. She said that to you? He asked. More or less. Dad. She's busy. She's got a lot riding on this dinner. Dad, that's not an excuse. I told him not to make it into something bigger than it was. I told him I was fine. Both of those things were at least partially true, so I didn't feel too dishonest saying them. What I didn't tell him was what I'd been thinking about since Tuesday, what I'd been sitting with quietly the way you sit with something before you decide whether to act on it. My wife passed 7 years ago, pancreatic cancer. 11 months from diagnosis to the end, which the doctors told us was actually fast, as if that was supposed to be a comfort. She and I had spent the better part of 30 years building something together. The house, the kids, the particular texture of a life that only makes sense to the people living inside it. After she died, I rearranged what I had left. I sold the house in Hamilton, too big, too many rooms that felt wrong without her in them, and bought a smaller place in Orangeville. I consolidated some investments. I updated my will with a lawyer I'd been using for years, a steady, precise woman named... Actually, I'll leave her out of this. She knows who she is. The point is, I had things in order. I'd always had things in order. That was another thing you did. You didn't leave messes for other people to deal with. My daughter didn't know the specifics of what I had. She knew I'd sold the Hamilton house. She knew her mother and I had saved carefully, but she'd never asked for details, and I'd never volunteered them, because it had never seemed like the right conversation to have. Money and death and the future. You don't just drop that on the dinner table. But that week, after the phone call, I started thinking about the details quite a bit. I called my lawyer on Thursday morning. I drove down to Toronto on a Friday, not for the dinner, obviously, I hadn't been invited to that, but to meet with the team at the wealth management office I'd been using since I sold the Hamilton house. My advisor there is a careful, methodical man who never oversells anything, which is why I've trusted him for as long as I have. We sat in a glass-walled office on the 32nd floor of a building on Bay Street, and I told him what I wanted to do. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "This is a significant restructuring," he said. "I know. You've thought about this?" "For about 4 days. But yes." He nodded slowly. "All right, let's talk through the mechanics." The plan wasn't complicated. It didn't need to be. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I want to be clear about that. What I was doing had nothing to do with cruelty, and everything to do with honesty, about who I was, what I'd built, and what it was actually worth. The promotion dinner happened on a Thursday evening. I know because my son texted me that afternoon to check in. I made myself a decent dinner at home. Pork chops, roasted potatoes, a glass of Niagara Peninsula Red that I'd picked up at the LCBO, and I watched a documentary about the building of the Trans-Canada Highway, which I found genuinely absorbing. My daughter did not call that night. She sent a text around midnight that said the dinner had gone well and that the partners had been very pleased. I replied that I was glad to hear it and went to sleep. She called 3 days later, Sunday afternoon, which was when she usually called, prompt and scheduled, like most things in her life. She was in a good mood. She talked about the dinner for a few minutes, the restaurant, the people, something impressive a senior partner had said about her Q3 work. She didn't mention having asked me not to come. I didn't bring it up. Then she said, "Dad, I've been thinking. My lease is up in March. There's a condo on the market in Liberty Village. It's a great location. The building is solid, but the prices are... well, you know what Toronto's like right now." I did know what Toronto was like. I'd spent 4 decades working in construction in this province. I had opinions about what had happened to housing in this city that I kept mostly to myself. "What kind of number are we talking?" I asked. She gave me the number. I took a breath. "I was thinking," she said carefully, "that if you were in a position to help with the down payment, even partially, it would make a huge difference. I've got the income to carry the mortgage. It's just the entry point that's the problem, and I know you did well on the Hamilton house, so..." "Let me think about it," I said. Of course, no pressure. I just figured it couldn't hurt to ask. "Of course it couldn't," I said. I let 2 weeks pass. During those 2 weeks, I finished the deck job in Barrie, had my furnace serviced, drove out to Kelowna for a long weekend to see my son, and thought about very little else. When I called her back, I told her I'd been going over my finances. I told her things were more complicated than she might have assumed, I told her that the Hamilton House money had been largely reallocated, that my investment structure had changed recently, and that I wasn't in a position to help with a down payment of that size. She was quiet. Relocated, she said finally. Reorganized, restructured. I've been thinking about the long term. What does that mean exactly? It means what it means. I've been thoughtful about where things go after I'm gone. I want to make sure the right things happen with what I've built. Another pause. Are you saying you've changed your will? I'm saying I've been reviewing everything comprehensively. She started to say something about timing, about how she'd assumed, about the Hamilton house and what she'd expected. I let her talk. I didn't interrupt. When she wound down, I said, I think it makes sense for you to build this yourself. You've got a strong income, you've got a good career. You don't need me for this. That's not the point, Dad. No, I said, I don't think it is. There was a long silence. You're upset about the dinner, she said. I'm not upset about anything. You are. This is about the dinner. I'm a retired construction worker from Hamilton, I said, and I kept my voice even because I meant every word I was about to say and I wanted her to hear them clearly. I went to Mohawk College. I've never set foot on a university campus except to help move you into residence. I sleep well. I have no regrets about how I've spent my time. I'm not embarrassed by a single day of my working life. And I don't need a dinner invitation to know what I'm worth. She was very quiet. But I did want you to know, I continued, that I know exactly what I'm worth, and what I've built, and what it means for the people around me. I think it's useful information. I heard her breathing. Dad, the condo will come together, I said. You're smart and you work hard, and the market will give you a moment eventually. You don't need me for the down payment. You never really needed me for any of it. That's what you said. I didn't say it with heat. I didn't say it to wound her. I said it because it was simply the logical conclusion of what she'd told me herself. We said goodbye politely. I made tea. The following spring, my son came back to Ontario for a visit. We drove up to Algonquin for a few days, canoed the Petawawa Corridor, slept badly in a tent, ate camp food, talked the way you can only talk when there's no reception and nowhere else to be. He asked me how things were with his sister. I told him things were in process. She called me, he said. She thinks you cut her out of the will. I haven't cut anyone out of anything. He looked at me across the fire. What I did, I said, was put a significant portion of my estate into a foundation. It goes toward trades training scholarships in Ontario. Kids who want to go into construction, electrical, plumbing, skilled trades, kids like I was. The foundation runs independently. It doesn't go to either of you, not because I'm punishing anyone, but because it's the right place for it. It was quiet for a while. The rest of it, I said, is divided equally. It always was. That part never changed. He nodded slowly. Does she know that? She will when the time comes. Or she can call my lawyer and ask. That information is available to her. He poked at the fire with a stick. You're a complicated man, Dad. I'm a simple man, I said. I just know what I built. She called in August. Not about the money, or not directly. She called on a Sunday afternoon, the usual time, and we talked about ordinary things for a while. Her work, the weather in Toronto, whether I'd had the back deck re-stain, and then she went quiet for a moment, the way she does when she's moving toward something difficult. I think I was unkind, she said, about the dinner. I think I said something that I shouldn't have said the way I said it. I didn't tell her she was forgiven, because I hadn't been holding anything against her that needed forgiving. What I felt wasn't anger. It had never been anger. I know you're proud of what you've done, I said. I'm proud of you too. I always have been. I know, she said quietly. But I need you to know something. Everything you have. The degree, the career, the confidence to walk into a room full of people on Bay Street and hold your own. None of it came from nowhere. Some of it came from nowhere. A lot of it. But some of it came from a man who slept in a truck in Sudbury, so the mortgage got paid. She didn't say anything for a long time. "I know that," she said finally. And the way she said it, I believed her. We stayed on the phone for another hour. We talked about her mother, which we hadn't done properly in a while. We talked about the condo, which she'd decided to put off for now, saving instead, building the down payment herself month by month. We talked about Christmas, whether she might come up to Orangeville, whether I'd make the beef and Guinness stew her mother used to make, that she'd always loved. I told her I'd make it. I told her I'd been making it every winter since, keeping the recipe exactly the same, because some things shouldn't change. Outside, the August light was doing that particular thing it does in Ontario in the late afternoon, going gold and slow over the back field, the kind of light that makes everything look like it deserves to be remembered. I was 63 years old. I had built things with my hands that were still standing. I had raised two people who were, in their different ways, finding their footing. I had loved someone for 30 years, and had the good sense to know how rare that was. I didn't need anyone to tell me what my life was worth. I already knew. I've been sitting with this story for a while now, turning it over the way you turn a stone in your hand. Not because I'm proud of what I did, though I don't regret it either, but because I think there's something in it worth saying plainly. My daughter is smart, genuinely smart. She worked hard to get where she is, and I never doubted that. But somewhere along the way, she confused the polish of a career with the substance of a person. She looked at calloused hands and a Mohawk college diploma and decided there wasn't much there worth respecting. That's not a character flaw you're born with. That's something that grows slowly, quietly, when nobody pushes back. I pushed back, not loudly, not cruelly, just clearly. What I've come to understand is that the choices we make, all of them, the small ones at the dinner table and the big ones in a lawyer's office, have a way of landing somewhere, not because the universe is keeping score in some mystical ledger, but because the people around us are paying attention, even when we assume they aren't. My daughter assumed I wasn't paying attention. She was wrong about that. There's a kind of integrity that doesn't announce itself. It just shows up year after year in the form of a mortgage paid on time, a hospital waiting room at 2 a.m., a check written without fanfare. That's the kind of person I tried to be. Not perfect, not impressive in any way that would register at a Bay Street dinner table, but honest and present and consistent. I think those things matter more than we give them credit for. The Trade Scholarship Foundation wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that. It was the most truthful thing I could do with what I'd built. I wanted the work of my life to go somewhere it would be understood, to kids sitting in the same kind of classrooms I sat in, making the same kind of calculations about what was possible for someone like them. That felt right in a way I couldn't fully articulate, but didn't need to. What I keep coming back to is this. You can't separate what a person does from what they become. My daughter has the intelligence, she always has, but intelligence without decency is just a sharper tool for making bad decisions. And decency without the backbone to hold your ground when someone diminishes you isn't really decency, it's just politeness. You need all three things working together. You need to know what's right, you need the honesty to act on it, and you need the steadiness to stay the course when it's uncomfortable. I wasn't born knowing those things. I learned them the slow way, through years of cold mornings and hard work, and watching what happened to people who cut corners, in construction and in life. My daughter called me in August. We talked about her mother. We talked about Christmas. That's not a small thing. That took something from both of us. And I think we're both better for it.